It's a touch. Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me? We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today for lunch and a guest speaker. Our speaker today is Dr. Daniel J. Salvat. He's from the Department of Physics. So I'm a science fiction fan, but I also love science, obviously. And when I think about physics, I think a lot about Star Trek and the world of exploration. For those of you who have an appreciation of engineering at a fundamental level, Dr. Salvat is exploring the standard model of particle physics and testing it to help build out our knowledge of the blueprint of how protons and nucleons work. His focus is on expanding the interactions, the weak interactions between nuclei and nucleons. He got his PhD from Indiana University in 2015 and completed his postdoctorate at the University of Washington. And if you all give a warm welcome, we'll introduce and hear from Dr. Salvat.
All right, thank you. You can hear me? All right, and folks in Indy can hear me? Yeah. Thank you a lot for the invitation. It's nice to be able to get out of the lab for once and come to a building I've never come to. Though I realized I think I have been here before. I came here one time for a demo of VR and 3D technology, and that was really neat. I was just telling Rex the VR made me a little sick, if I'm being totally honest, but you know, it's fine. And thank you for the pizza. Mother Bears is always much appreciated. So I'm going to talk about, so normally in these academic talks you have a provocative title, the actual thing that I'm doing, right? So I left that part off because hopefully it'll become clear in the first few slides. So let's just be provocative for a moment. And how do there we go. Okay, so in the realm of physics, in the realm of particle and nuclear physics, there are some processes that are very rare, and that means that you have to get a lot of data, and yet the signature for what you're searching for, that process or that interaction, it doesn't show up very much at all. That means because there's very little data, it means that it's probably pretty poorly understood. And in particular, what I'm going to talk about in a moment, it means that interactions with matter are not necessarily well constrained. And I think that just if I'm being poetic for a moment, you know, ghosts are wispy and fleeting. So I think neutrinos are kind of like ghosts. And of course, now I have the Police album cover here. This was at the front of my dad's record collection growing up. It's actually from a book, Ghost in the Machine, about the mind-body duality, but I know it from the Police. So where do neutrinos come from? I'll give you 4 examples of sources. So if you have a or if you have a very heavy star, and there's a type 2 supernova or a core collapse supernova. So that's when the fuel stops burning, gravity takes over, it collapses, it bounces off of its core, and a lot of light is produced, but that light is trapped in this temporarily dense object. But then you also have these transmutations of protons to neutrons, and you emit neutrinos, and those neutrinos fly away. And in fact, the vast majority of the energy is emitted in the form of neutrinos. It's some truly astronomical number, like 10 to the 59 ergs of energy or something that you can't even wrap your mind around. Neutrinos also come from nuclear reactors. So of course there's lots of fissile material as well as radioisotopes that are produced. You can see my cursor, right? Yeah, okay. And so anytime you have a beta emitter, you'll have neutrinos coming out, and so you get a lot of in particular, anti-neutrinos coming from nuclear reactors. And if you've never had the pleasure of touring a nuclear reactor, an open pool reactor, it's really neat to go there and see the eerie Cherenkov glow of the reactor. It's kind of cool to see. Neutrinos are produced in accelerators. Even relatively modest accelerators will produce these particles called pions. I'm going to talk more about this, so I'll gloss over it. But they produce particles which then decay, emitting neutrinos. And just you can go online and go to a radioisotope company and just buy some radioactive stuff, and any electron capture isotope or beta emitting isotope will emit neutrinos. Now an alpha. So you probably know the general alphabet of radiation: alpha rays, beta rays, gamma rays. So alpha rays which are helium nuclei. If I have an alpha emitter right here, I can just put a piece of paper in front of it, and that'll stop the alphas, right? They're very feeble because they're heavy and they're charged. Betas, same thing. You can put a piece of plastic near it, a sheet of plastic, and that's enough to stop those betas. So you might ask, what does it take to stop a neutrino? And the answer is it takes about a light year thick slab of lead to stop a neutrino. That gives you a sense for how feebly they interact. And so I have my little figures here of so Voyager 1, which launched in 77, after 22,000 years, it'll be about this far along our slab of lead. And if you wanted to make such a slab of lead, even if it were a pencil width, I made this slide when Jeff Bezos was the richest man, but so it's about 180,000 Bezoses. I need to update it to Musk's, I guess. And so that's for relatively conventional interactions that had been detected before over the past decades. It turns out for a relatively low, so 20 mega electron volts is a relatively low energy neutrino. And for a neutrino of that energy, there's a process called CEvNS, which I'm about to talk about. And for that, the interaction probability is much higher, but still you need 18 light days of lead in order to stop a neutrino via this process. So yeah, please.
Is this on?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. On the previous slide, is the thing that looks like a Cheez-It that's vaping and wearing a mask, is that supposed to be a neutrino?
Yes. Yeah. It's a good question. So there's actually I forget the name of the website. There's a website where you can all of the particles of the standard model of particle physics have been manifested as stuffed animals, and so this is a neutrino stuffed animal. Yeah. I don't have any of them, but I've been to the website and I've seen it. So yeah, that's a stand-in for a neutrino. Yeah. So now, if you think about that 50 or 20 MeV neutrino, you can think, of course, we talk in physics about particle wave duality. So that neutrino, that particle has a wavelength, and it turns out that its wavelength is about 25 femtometers, so 25 times 10 to the minus 15 meters. That's actually quite large compared to the size of a nucleus, which is only about 1 femtometer. And so what happens is you have this effect where if a neutrino is coming in and it's low energy, it's chugging along, it sees a nucleus, it sees it as a single coherent object. It sees it as a single coherent whole, and it scatters individually from each nucleon, but it does so with constructive interference. And so the odds of that interaction are much more appreciable than some of the other conventional interactions that have been measured in the past. And so hence the name coherent elastic neutrino-nucleus scattering. And so neutrino comes in, scatters elastically. What you actually see is the recoiling nucleus with some kinetic energy. That's the only observable signature that you have. And then the neutrino just flies, it scatters and it flies away. So it's wispy and fleeting. And you don't need to know this, you don't need to digest this equation, but I put this equation here. This is in physics, we talk about cross section. Cross section is basically interchangeable with interaction probability. So the cross section can be expressed in this way. T here is the kinetic energy of the recoiling nucleus. E nu is the energy of the neutrino. And then the rest of these quantities, or M is the mass of the nucleus. And then the rest of these quantities are just quantities that come from the standard model of particle physics, basically. And it so happens that the interaction of neutrinos with protons is relatively small compared to that for neutrons. And so at the end of the day, roughly speaking, the interaction probability goes like the number of neutrons in that nucleus squared. Okay, so I'm going to talk about accelerators again. So we do our experiments at Oak Ridge National Lab in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, beautiful Oak Ridge. And we do our experiments at the Spallation Neutron Source. So that's what I'm showing this sort of bird's eye view of here. So you have a 1 giga electron volt proton LINAC, and that feeds into a storage ring. And so the protons accumulate, and then they're peeled off and they hit a liquid mercury target. And that produces a lot of neutrons. Notice I said neutron and not neutrino. The main purpose of this facility, in this building here where this target is to produce lots of neutrons. Those neutrons are then cooled, and they're sent to to various scattering instruments which study condensed matter, that study materials. That's the main purpose of this laboratory. But as a byproduct, you produce a lot of those pions that I mentioned earlier, and therefore you produce a lot of neutrinos. The other thing I should mention is that it's not a steady stream of protons just always hitting this mercury target. It happens in these very sharp pulses that are like a few hundred nanoseconds in width and time, 60 times a second. And that turns out to be very powerful. So it means that you know exactly when to expect neutrinos at your detector. And so anything that appears, you know, at a time unrelated to that 60 times a second, you can just ignore. Right. And so just to give a few numbers, just to give a sense for how bright of a source of neutrinos this is, if you're 20 meters away from that target, and every little square centimeter patch on my hand, you have about 30 million neutrinos passing through your hand every second. And that corresponds to just less than 1/10 of a neutrino per proton on target. And you see the decay chain here. So protons hit the mercury target, they produce, so pions come in a charged flavors, pi minus and pi plus, that's their electrical charge. Pi minus are attracted to the nuclei, the helium, mercury nuclei, and are captured immediately, whereas the pi plus just kind of hang out until they decay and they emit neutrinos. And this isn't my favorite plot on the upper right because keep in mind it's a log vertical scale. So this is just showing the energy distribution of those neutrinos, and this, basically the only thing you need to know is basically they're all produced between 0 and about 50 MeV, which is right in the energy range for the CEvNS process to occur. And then the time profile of that is in the lower right. So these new mu's here are generated virtually instantaneously. And so as soon as protons hit the target, you get this burst of those neutrinos, followed by the eventual decay of the muon, which gives you 2 other neutrinos. And so we call those prompt and delayed neutrinos. We do this work as part of the COHERENT collaboration. It's more than a dozen institutions, more than 100 members, in I don't even know how many countries. It's well, I guess US, Canada, Korea, Russia. I guess that's it. I'm looking at Rex to see if he remembers anyone that I don't. Yeah. Yeah, and as you can see, and so COHERENT it's physicists like their cutesy acronyms. COHERENT is not an acronym, it just is a name. So we did that for once. And as you can see, we went virtual during the pandemic. We went hybrid during the pandemic, and there I am. Where are you, Rex? You're there. Yeah. So yeah. So and this isn't even everyone in the collaboration. So we had to find a place to do our experiments because, as I said, that building is meant for condensed matter studies of neutrons or using neutrons. So we had to find a place that was kind of out of the way to do these experiments, and it turns out there is a basement hallway which is quite close to that target, but what you want is to be close to that target and yet have a lot of material between you and the target to shield other types of radiation aside from neutrinos. And it turns out we found that, and we call it Neutrino Alley, and it's just a basement hallway. It's a little cramped, and this is a kind of a Google Street View view of Neutrino Alley. You can actually go. I should have put the link to the website, but you can actually go online and you can walk through Neutrino Alley. It's pretty neat. And so various detectors are employed here up against the wall. The mercury target is up here somewhere. It's about 20 meters in that direction. All right, so I'm going to mention our cesium iodide detector. I taught myself during the pandemic to use Adobe Premiere, and so whenever I get the chance to show a GIF, I'm going to show it just because I put a lot of work into it during the pandemic. Anyway, lockdowns didn't treat us all very well, right? So we have our first detection was with a cesium iodide detector, so that's our good little boy. And I won't dwell on this for too long because it gets pretty technical, but I wanted to mention a few things about it. So here it is. These 2 students, Bjorn Schultz and Grayson Rich, are holding the detector. It was at the time by far the smallest neutrino detector in the world. I mean, for more conventional neutrino interactions, you need detectors that are I mean, what the mini boon detector is like 800 tons of mineral oil. I mean, it's huge. It's a 12-meter sphere, whereas this is just this little 14-kilogram crystal. And so cesium iodide is a scintillator, which means that neutrino comes in, bounces into either a cesium or iodine nucleus. It recoils with some kinetic energy. That recoil, as it traverses the cesium iodide medium, produces light. That light rattles around until it sees this photomultiplier tube, which detects photons here at the top. And here now you realize the motivation for the title of my talk. This was the cover of Science magazine in 2017. And so I won't dwell on these plots for too long because you'll see versions of them again later. But basically, you look 60 times a second at protons on or neutrinos going through your detector, and anytime one of those interactions happens, light rattles around, hits that PMT, you get a little voltage blip in your PMT. The size of that voltage blip is proportional to the number of photons that hit it, which is in turn proportional to the kinetic energy of that recoiling nucleus. And so you can histogram that light yield, we call it, and you can histogram when in time relative to the beam those events occurred, and then you can those are the black dots there, and then you can make predictions about what the shape of those histograms ought to be, and indeed they agree, and that confirms that CEvNS both exists and it occurs in a way that is consistent with the standard model. I should probably skip this slide. I'm not gonna. This was the first result with a limited amount of data. We went back and did it with more data. The only thing I'll mention on this slide is just to give you a sense for numbers. That detector ran for several years, and so the unrelated background events that occurred were about 1,200 events, plus these other, broken out these other background events, which are quite small. But the number of CEvNS events, the number of CEvNS recoils that actually occurred was only about 300 events. So in spite of all those neutrinos passing through your detector, you only see about 300 in several years. Okay, well, what I'm going to focus on is liquid argon. This is just Google image search here. So I'm actually not even entirely sure this is argon. I'm taking that for granted. But so argon, of course, is a noble gas. It's in the atmosphere. If you cool it to about 85 Kelvin, it is a liquid. And just, if you've been to any science demo with cryogenic liquids, with liquid nitrogen, that's 77 Kelvin. And so it's very similar in temperature, and it behaves very similarly in that respect. And it is also a scintillator. So again, neutrino comes in, recoils, produces scintillation light on the liquid argon, and you can make a detector out of that. And so that's what we did. So here I'm showing the cutaway of the detector. You have a Teflon cylinder. Teflon is very good at diffusely reflecting light. So you have a Teflon cylinder, and then 2 PMTs viewing that to detect that light. That's within this liquid argon volume, which is in turn within an insulating vacuum, and then there's shielding to protect against outside radiation. So there's water to shield neutrons, and copper and lead to shield gamma rays. So just to really hammer this home, I was talking with a colleague, and we were trying to. So I don't know if you guys know, you can go on Wikipedia, and there are Wikipedia pages called orders of magnitude. So there's orders of magnitude for length and for time, and there's one for probability. And so let's apply that here. So you have tens of millions of neutrinos passing through each square centimeter of this detector, and this detector is the innards of this detector are about yay big. So that's roughly 100 million billion neutrinos per day. So the odds that if I'm a neutrino and I pass through the detector, the odds that I actually interact are the odds, roughly speaking, that given that you were born in the US, the odds that you become the president and then you win the Powerball. So here's a schematic view of Neutrino Alley in the past. And this actually shows you here's the proton beam, here's the mercury target. And so you can get as close as about 19 meters to that target in the hallway. And we employ several detectors. I'm only going to talk about the liquid argon one, but there's many to detect CEvNS on different nuclei as well as other neutrino interactions. That was the past, and then in the future, we're upgrading a lot of detectors and introducing new ones. So again, I'm not going to dwell on this because that's a lot of information. So what I'm going to focus on is what are some of the physics that you can do. And if there's one thing that so Rex and I come from the realm of nuclear physics. We collaborate on COHERENT with a lot of particle physicists or high energy physicists. If there's one thing that we agree on, is that the standard model must be wrong. Standard model of particle physics must be wrong, and so we do a lot of tests of that. I'm gonna. Well, I guess I should probably skip this. I'll just quickly say, the way that you actually do these experiments is, as I said, you look in a window of time when protons hit that target, and you see a little blip, and that's a candidate event, right? And so you count those events, and those events have a kinetic energy, capital T. They have a time relative to the beam, little t, and maybe even other variables. I'll give an example of that later. And then you know how long you've sat your detector where you've put it. You know the interaction, the efficiency of your detector, and you know the flux of neutrinos coming at you. And so from that you can measure a cross section. That's what we do. That's the sort of nuclear particle physics that we do every day. And I shouldn't even really show this. This is just to say that there's a lot of consideration that goes into this, and I'm glossing over lots of details, but there's a lot of care that has to go into doing this. So I'm going to skip to, so here are 3 examples of physics that we can do with CEvNS, and this is not a full list, of course, but just to give a few examples. So this diagram here, this so-called Feynman diagram, this is what you see, the typical schematic representation of an interaction, of a scattering interaction. Neutrino comes in. What's actually happening is much like, if you have 2 charged objects, the sort of quantum mechanical way of saying that they interact is that they exchange a photon. In the weak interaction, the way that you say that is they exchange either a W or a Z boson. In this case, it's a Z boson. And so that Z boson is exchanged, and the nucleus recoils. But particle theorists like to suppose new particles that could also cause these same interactions, and would therefore change the overall interaction rate, make it higher than you expect or lower than you expect compared to the standard model of particle physics. And so there could be some new particle here, and we test for that in a very generic way with our detectors. And I guess I won't really explain this plot other than the shaded regions are anything outside the shaded region is a model that is excluded by our experiments. So I mentioned supernova earlier, and the neutrinos that come from them. So the shaded plots here show the energy distribution of neutrinos that come from the SNS, and then the solid lines are the energy distribution of neutrinos from supernovae. And as you can see, they don't completely overlap, but they overlap somewhat. And so it turns out that measuring CEvNS the way that we do it, in turn, will inform later larger scale experiments that hope to detect supernovae from neutrinos via neutrinos. And so now of course, the question you ask is, when is the next supernova going to go off? And the answer is we hope, any day now. And then lastly, so this is a bit different, but you can, it turns out that if you have 1 giga-electron volt protons hitting a mercury target, there's a certain class of dark matter which actually would be produced in the accelerator, and it would cause an excess of events beyond what we expect from the standard model. And we would observe that in our detector. Thus far, we've not seen that, and so we're kind of tamping down on whether that model is viable. So those are just 3 examples of some of the physics that we can do. And so now on to what the data actually look like and the computing resources that we use. So this is the COHERENT detector. So I don't know if I gave it a name earlier. It's called we call it the COHERENT detector. And I'm showing the cross-sectional view here again. So you have the 2 PMTs, top and bottom, that view it. That's top and bottom here. And what you measure is you digitize the voltage, basically. And so if you have an interaction, what happens is you're humming along, you don't see anything, and then bam, you get this big burst of light very quickly, followed by these subsequent later bursts of light. And these little blips are probably individual photons being detected. You'll notice that you're chugging along at 0 here, and then as soon as you have that big burst of light, you're offset from 0 a little bit. That's just an artifact of the way the electronics read out these signals, and that has to be corrected using an algorithm. We do that, and then once you do that, you get these so-called corrected waveforms, and so you can see again big negative burst of the fact that these pulses are negative is just incidental to the electronics. Flip this upside down in your head if you like. The point is you get a big burst of light, followed by subsequent small bursts of light. And the blue here is the cumulative integral of that signal. If you integrate that, that tells you basically how much light was detected, and that's in turn proportional to the kinetic energy. So when you do these measurements, you have to make some choices about how you analyze these waveforms. So what we do is we have a hard threshold below, so we just keep chugging along. If you go below this hard threshold, you say, that's a potential event, and then you hold off for an extended period of time, and you count and you correct and integrate anything in that waveform for some microseconds past that, and then you look for coincident events, coincident pulses between the two PMTs, and if all that checks out, you call that a good event, roughly speaking. So to actually do this analysis, just to give you a sense of scale here, so the data come from COHERENT, so that's, again, we digitize a waveform 120 times a second. We do it 60 times a second, coincident with the beam to look for what we're looking for, and then we have a separate window that's well separated in time from that to measure backgrounds, to measure unrelated events. All that data, we ran that detector from in its final form from 2017 to 2021. So about 4 years of running, and that amounted to about 100 terabytes worth of data. We have a first stage, so there's this DACman software. This was written by a scientist. It's on GitHub. It's for analyzing this type of data. And so you run that script over your raw binary files, and they produce these reduced root files with candidate events in them. Those usually don't contain the waveforms anymore, so you save a lot on disk space by doing that. So it's only a few terabytes. And then you have subsequent chains, which further simplify the list until you just have a simple list of events versus, energy or some proxy for it, and time, and maybe a few other variables, and that's it. You histogram that, and then you do a statistical analysis to understand that, and to compare to the standard model and whatnot. If you do that for the first result from the liquid argon detector, this is much like what you saw for the cesium iodide. You histogram it in time, energy, and in our case, F90. I'll say what F90 is a bit later. I won't talk about it yet. But the black dots are the data, and the histograms are the predictions. And as you can see, they agree reasonably well, which means that we're sort of confirming the standard model in that case. So we're still analyzing the full final set of data from COHERENT or CEvNS as we sometimes call it, that detector. We collaborate with Seoul National University in Seoul, South Korea, and we put all the reduced data, all these data on IU Slate project, and IU and SNU folks are analyzing that data now, and we're kind of in these last stages of the analysis. So the computing resources that we use, so of course all the instruments are down at Oak Ridge. The physics division at Oak Ridge has a computing cluster, 2-node, 256 core system. It's a relatively modest system that's just used by a few experiments. And then they have RAID and tape storage for all detector systems. And that's the tape storage is where the raw data are stored, for example. Here at IU, of course, I don't have to tell you guys, we have Quartz Research Desktop and Slate Project. And as I hinted at on the last slide, this is really essential for this work. And I really thank you guys for having such a great system. So all the reduced data are on Slate Project, and we use Research Desktop on a regular basis. And we store all of our scripts and repositories and everything there. And I'll talk a bit later about machine learning applications, potential machine learning applications. And I have a Dell XPS Windows laptop, and if I need Linux, I just go on Red. It's really great. It's really nice. We're also exploring other computing resources. There's like NERSC, for example, and Access, which is a successor to Xceed. Do I have that right? I think I have that right. And so we're exploring that, but we're hoping we don't have to. We're hoping we're not big enough fish that we have to bark up that tree, but we'll see. Okay, so now we're going to upgrade this detector, and here's my $6 million man. I've never even seen the show before, so I don't know why it settled on this, but it just popped into my head. Okay, so now I'm showing a cutaway view of the upgraded detector. It's, as you can see, well, you can't really tell. It's much larger. It's, I think I'm about, if here's the floor, I think I'm about that tall. Does that sound right to you, Rex? I think that's about right. I've even seen this thing in person, but it escapes me. But so it's big. The internal light collection volume is much bigger, and you have many more PMTs. And like I said before, you can run one of these smaller detectors for several years, and you only get like a few hundred events that you're interested in. And now with this bigger detector, we're going to get several thousand events per year. And that'll let us do a lot of powerful studies of beyond standard model physics. A lot of the R&D for the cryogenics and for the photomultiplier tubes was done here at IU, as well as at Seoul National University. And yeah, so I guess I won't dwell on this plot too much, but this plot is just showing the kinetic energy, recoil energy that we predict to see per year in this detector. So peeling away layers of the onion a little bit, here's the inner volume. It's a hexagonal shaped volume with Teflon panels on the inside, again, to reflect that light. So neutrino comes in, recoils, light bounces around, bounces off the Teflon, hits the PMTs, and then you see that as little voltage blips in your PMTs. And instead of just one PMT on the top and bottom, it's 61 on the top, 61 on the bottom. And then the rest of this is just this explaining the way that the cryogenic system works. So we're building this thing. The cryostat was built by a company in South Korea and delivered. This is it sitting in South Korea. And this is one of those photomultiplier tubes. It's about 3 inches in diameter. I should have brought, I thought of this too late, but I should have brought one. I could have brought one and passed it around, but they're neat little things. So this is Bo Johnson, IU PhD student, and Jeremy Liu, IU postdoc. They both live in Oak Ridge, and they're putting this thing together. So you can see a lot of progress on putting those PMTs on the platters that they rest on, and eventually putting this whole detector together. So here, and like I said, here's the cryostat, the outer insulating vacuum chamber in South Korea, and here it is in Oak Ridge, and it's not quite its final resting place, but close. And then here's 2 Seoul National University students preparing to put the liquid volume into the insulating volume, and here's Dojin here testing some of the thermometers that we're going to use in the experiment by pouring liquid nitrogen over the top of them. So now we have a lot more data. So we go from 2 to 122 PMTs, and just to give a sense of numbers for how big the data are, you're measuring a voltage and you digitize it at 125 megasamples per second, and that voltage is measured and encoded as a 16-bit number. And you do that for about 33 in a 33 microsecond window around when the protons hit the target. And so that gives you about 8 kilobytes times 122. Then you do that 120 times a second over the course of a day, and this 10 is sort of order of magnitude. It's several terabytes of data per day. But thankfully, Bo, our student Bo, who's been developing the data acquisition system for the detector, he showed that we're moving to HDF5 format for saving the data, which is really pretty nice. It lets me use Python, which I love, getting away with that. But you can use zlib compression, and that gives you about a factor of 3 reduction, which we're going to need, I think. So at the end of the day, that gives you about 760 terabytes per year of raw compressed data. We're exploring zero suppression, so I'm showing this waveform plot again. So, a lot of the time you digitize one of these 33 microsecond waveforms and just nothing interesting happens at all. It's just noise the whole time, right? So if you can identify such a waveform, why save it, right? Doing that right is tricky, and we have to do it carefully, and so we're not doing it initially. We're going to have to just save the 760 terabytes per year of raw data. But we'll of course explore zero suppression and try to get that right, and that'll help us in the future. Right, and so if you guys know anything about particle and nuclear physics, you probably know that GEONT4 is kind of the standard framework for doing Monte Carlo simulations in particle and nuclear physics. We use that, of course. We have our detector mocked up in GEONT4. Those are quite large. I was just talking with Bo. He's done a lot of the simulation studies of the detector, and he's got I think it's around 600 or 700 gigabytes worth of output files from Geant 4 just for doing the studies that he's done. And so it's going to be, by the time we're really rolling with this detector, it'll be, I don't know. This is a wild guess, but let's say 10, 20 terabytes worth of output potentially. It could be that large. And then of course we need something like Quartz for analyzing reduced files, and as I already mentioned, and Bo is doing those simulations on Quartz, and so we're going to need resources for that. Here's the schematic for what the data flow looks like for 750, at least a proposed scheme. We're still working this out. So data come from the detector. Here's some figures. Again, I already said 760 terabytes a year. That's a few gigabytes a minute. So then immediately we will shuffle the raw data off to network attached storage, which we're then hoping to use, hoping to save that to tape storage. The OLCF is the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility. They have a system called Kronos, which is a very large tape system. We already have a 1 petabyte allocation for our experiment, but we're hoping to expand that. And that would allow us to store the 760 terabytes a year. But as the data come in, we're developing a program that will analyze that data and identify candidate events and save the data in a reduced size. We expect that, based on our experience with COHERENT, to be about 20 terabytes a year. Then you can compute some quantities related to that and shove it off to a database to monitor the health of our detector as a function of time, and then pass it off to the Oak Ridge Physics Division Computing Cluster, which is about 250 terabyte RAID system currently. And then we're hoping to shuffle off that 20 terabytes a year to IU, and potentially also to Seoul National University in Korea. And then if we want if we have to go back and reanalyze those raw waveforms, we're going to have to stage it from tape, some number of terabytes at a time, transfer it, analyze it, scrub that, rinse, repeat many times to analyze the data. So we're hoping to not have to do that, but you never know. Okay, so I'll conclude with a few remarks on machine learning, some applications that we've attempted, and then maybe if you guys have any input on that, I'd be curious. And so yeah, machine learning is generating cats or identifying cats from dogs or whatnot. So I mentioned this F90 quantity earlier. It's not so complicated. So when the neutrino comes in and it bounces off the nucleus, we call that a nuclear recoil. If a gamma ray comes in, typically it doesn't interact with the nucleus, it interacts with one of the orbiting electrons in the atom, and it kicks that electron, and that electron recoils, so that's called an electron recoil. And those look different in the detector. So these are two waveforms, digitized waveforms. So what happens in a nuclear recoil is you get this big initial burst of light, and then you get kind of little blips of light that come in later. Most of it comes in that initial burst. The opposite is true for the electron recoil. You get this initial burst, but then you still have a preponderance of events at a late time. And so what we typically do is we form this quantity called F90. So you basically integrate this part of the waveform and you divide it by the total integral of the waveform. And if you do that, in our nuclear recoil events, more of that waveform happens in the first 90 nanoseconds. And so this is F90 on this axis versus energy on the x-axis. So the nuclear recoils show up here and the electron recoils show up down here. And so you might think, okay, well, nuclear recoils are cats and electron recoils are dogs. So let's throw machine learning at it, right? You can do that. Turns out it's tricky. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long. So first of all, you need to feed it good information. So we have a DT generator which produces neutrons, that produces nuclear recoil events, and then we have a cobalt-57 as a gamma emitter, and so that produces electron recoil events. So we take data with these two sources right next to our detector, and then we train a convolutional neural network model. This wasn't done by me, and I'm telling you like 150% of what I know here, so don't ask me any hard questions. But I'm by no means a machine learning expert, but it's a convolutional neural network model. So you can train it on these events with certain cuts on the data, and you can see for events that are relatively high in kinetic energy, you really do a pretty good job of inaccuracy. But ultimately the problem here is that, and you can kind of tell from this plot here, that for very low energy events, you just have very low energy means very few photons, right? And so you just don't have a lot of information in that waveform to discriminate between nuclear recoils and electron recoils. And in the machine learning model, like in this F90 variable, you see that the two bands kind of converge, and you can't tell them apart at these lowest energies. And so that's a limitation, I think, of application to this. And then, by the way, this is all, of course, COHERENT data. I won't dwell on this for too long, but so there's a so-called T-distributed stochastic neighbor embedding model, which basically is a way of taking very large high dimensional space data and trying to collapse it to a few dimensions while preserving some notion of distance between points in the data. And so I didn't talk about it, but those more conventional neutrino interactions that produce a lot more light can occur in our detector. And here's our detector mocked up in JANT4. So neutrino comes in, you have a neutrino interaction which transmutes a proton into a neutron and emits an electron, and that zips in your detector, and you get a lot of light out that rattles around, and it could hit one of many PMTs. And so you have this large parameter space of which PMT got hit with how much light and where is it in relation to the other PMTs. And so that's a large parameter space. We trained on JANT4 simulations. We wanted, in particular, and we call those types of events charge current events. You don't really need to know that, but just so you know, those look an awful lot like cosmic rays, and so we want to differentiate those two. And so this was an attempt to do that. And so you see there's this two-dimensional reduced parameter space from this TSNE model. The red are, sorry, the axis labels are a bit small, but the red are cosmic ray events, and the gray are these charge current events that we want to detect, that we care about. And so you can just look at it and kind of say, okay, if I draw a box that looks about like this and delete those events, what do you get? How well do you preserve the events that you want to see and reject the ones that you don't? And sorry, I don't know, this status bar is in the way. Oh no. Yeah, okay, so you can see it here. So cosmic rays, you can successfully reject about 2/3 of them, but that still means you keep about 1/3. Whereas you can detect almost 90% of the charge current events that we care about. And so there's a lot of room for improvement. This was done by our collaborator, Vinicius da Silva. Is a student at Tufts University. Why did he choose TSNE models? I don't know. He probably knows, but there's probably some other model out there that's much better. So I'd be curious to know if you guys have any opinions about this kind of stuff and want to talk more about machine learning applications. So with that, I'll conclude. Here's my last GIF, my cat tax. So CEvNS is a rich source of standard model tests. We can test beyond standard model physics. We use an array of detector technologies, but IU champions the liquid argon effort. We heavily use Quartz and Slate project, and it's become essential for the COHERENT analysis, which we're hoping to finish in the coming weeks or months. And then COHERENT is imminently coming online next calendar year, and we need to address these questions of large-scale storage and as well as computing resources. And with increased number of photosensors, you have this much larger parameter space to work in, and so machine learning could become crucial. We're still exploring that. And then I didn't talk about it. We actually have another project to detect CEvNS with a totally different technology, and we're also using Quartz for that as well. So with that, I'll take questions. Thank you.
We should give Indianapolis a chance first.
Okay, I have a question. You talked about the adjusted photography, which I know that we've seen in like satellite-based astronomy photography. But way back earlier, something I missed that I was kind of confused by, or at least I didn't see the connection, was the cesium iodide part, and I'm trying to figure out how that connects to your event detection. I missed something in that connection there.
It's
Thank
just
you.
so you can detect sevens using a variety of different detectors that have a variety of different constituent nuclei. And so that was just the first detector that we used to detect sevens. So it was just kind of a separate effort to detect sevens on cesium and iodine, and the argon is it's a bit lighter nucleus, and you can detect sevens on argon. And it turns out and I mentioned earlier in the talk that you expect the interaction probability to go like the number of neutrons squared. And so that means that the interaction probability scales in that particular way if you use different nuclei. And so that's to test that is to test the standard model. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Just
Okay.
when the jump happened, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question. Okay, there it is. Yeah, so it seems on the machine learning thing, it seems like using machine learning to distinguish between two different discrete sets of waveforms is a pretty common thing and should work pretty easily, though I know there are exceptions. Is it the case, an exception I thought that I've encountered is like I know people who were using machine learning to take recordings of like frog sounds that have been turned into like graphs and waves. And you can distinguish, say, like, spring peepers from bullfrogs easily. But I think there are two tree frogs in Indiana that even like, an experienced frogger can't really tell apart. Is the difficulty you're running into the fact that some of the, like the waveform for electron recoil and the wave for what was the other one? Nuclear recoil look close enough, it'd be hard for a human to tell them apart also?
Yeah, it's basically, yeah, that's basically right. Well, that's kind of what I was saying here.
That's what I was picking up. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing it clearly. If that's the problem, then I wouldn't expect a machine learning that's trained on data where like maybe a experienced human is the gold standard. I wouldn't expect a machine learning to do better than that.
Okay, yeah. That's what my intuition tells me, but
that's what both my intuition and my knowledge tell me.
Okay.
So we're all in agreement. Excellent.
Yeah.
I had another question.
Sure.
This could be because I don't understand GIFs. I don't see the connection between cesium and Jacques. Was it Jacques Cousteau petting a crab?
Sorry, say again?
I think that was Jacques Cousteau, right? Oh, no, I knew it was Jacques Cousteau, right? Yeah, that was Jacques Cousteau. Okay, but it's just, if there's no Jacques Cousteau connection. Okay, cool. I should.
I also have another question, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
All right, and it has to do with the events that you're calling non-events, or ones that you necessarily don't want to record or keep because you're looking at data retention problems and space issues. I can totally get that. The question is, what does that lack of event mean from the pure science perspective? Like in terms of the number of things, if a shot happens and no event is recorded, does that mean anything? The lack of event.
Yeah, it just means, well, I mean, so the more shielded your detector is from outside radiation, the less of these little blips you're going to observe, and you're only looking in a limited finite amount of time in a window around the beam, and so there's just always some probability that no interaction occurs at all. So there's nothing particularly deep about that. It just means that the overall rate of interactions is small compared to the time window that you're looking in. That's really all that means.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you. This was awesome. I work with research data services, and so I have a very practical data storage and long-term retention question. I know you were talking about looking about this increase in your data. You're looking at an exponential increase of data over time as the technology improves and changes. Do you have like a long-term plan for the amount of data you expect to need to store long-term? Do you have sharing considerations? Like, do you have grant-funded work that needs to be shared publicly? Like, what kind of data sharing do you expect to have, or is it just all going to be kept internal within your team long-term?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to some extent, the answer is we're working on that. But like I mentioned, the OLCF Chronos system, we have an allocation for that, and we're using that, and that guarantees long-term retention of the data. though talking with the staff that we collaborate with at Oak Ridge, we're hoping to expand that. Is it going to be enough? I think we're still figuring that out, to be honest. And that's why I mentioned things like access, because I think that would be a natural solution if Oak Ridge can't do it. And Oak Ridge, the physics division has, some money to fund that expansion of that allocation. But if that's not sufficient, then we bark up the access tree, I think. Yeah.
As part of your question about the general public access, is that's always a tough one for our field.
Yes, and the part about IU.
Okay.
Yeah, like what you're hoping for IU storage, but also like what amount of public sharing or accessibility to data sets or publications, et cetera, that you might have to make available.
Yeah, that comes up sometimes, especially when we're reminded when we write proposals and so forth. It's asked.
What is your data management? What is your dissemination plan? All that kind of stuff. Yeah,
I think what practically, if I can add, we 760 terabytes of data is not of interest to the general public, just the practical thing to it. But we do disseminate our results in forms that people could use after we massage it and give the final 300 and some events. Everybody could have access to those. But I think in our business in general, high energy nuclear physics, we haven't figured out a way, and I don't think there's interest in the 760 terabytes.
Yeah, and we do these so-called data releases. We've done that with our past detectors, where the final few hundred events with background subtracted, we do put that in just a plain text format and put it on a website with a DOI. I'm trying to remember the name of. Do you remember the name of the website? It's starts with a Z. I cannot remember what it's called. Zenodo? Something like that, yeah. But it's a website with a well-defined DOI, and so you can always go to it and reference it and stuff like that. We do that kind of thing with the reduced data, yeah. Yeah.
On the cesium prediction histogram, it looked like, if I'm reading correctly, like the little things that looked like miniature box plots with like dots and error bars. Is it the case that it sort of matched up with the predicted histogram really well early, and off toward the tail end it kind of like got away, or am I misreading that?
You're talking about
that
this
one.
guy?
Yeah, so maybe the one in the northeast corner. Maybe the histogram in the northeast corner, or the greens are the histogram is the original prediction.
The actual events are the black dots, and then the solid black line is there are three different types of neutrinos which we expect to interact, and so you have to stack those up in the shades of green here to get the prediction, and so you're comparing the black curve here with the black dots. Does that address your question?
Yeah, that was my question. It also seemed like it was a much tighter fit near the sort of like mode, or the near the peak of the histogram.
Oh, that's just statistical. We didn't, this was the initial measurement with a limited amount of data. And then, we went back and did it with more data. And here you see the final results, and,
that looks like more like what I was expected to see.
Yeah.
Cool. I have another question.
Sure.
Sure. You mentioned that quartz and red and slate were all essential for your research. Would you also say the helpful and knowledgeable staff of RT were essential? Oh, cool. I just wanted. No, I'm just, I'm.
Oh yeah, right. I'm in the Slack workspace, so I definitely lean on you guys for a lot of advice, and yeah.
One more question.
Sure.
Okay, I noticed with references to like the $6 Million Man, Jacques Cousteau, and an album from your dad's record collection, are you ever tempted to update your references? I can respect either answer 100%.
Ooh, getting roasted here. Yeah.
No, I'm just.
I should. It's been a while since I fired up Adobe Premiere. Maybe it's time. Yeah.
No judgment either way. Going old school is completely fine also. I guess it was a penultimate question. This one might be my last question. I haven't had a reason directly to work with a lot of stuff. You mentioned having an interest in something like a principal component analysis, except with nonlinear, so preserving certain other aspects during the transformation. And you said, are people interested in talking about that? Yeah, at least one of us is. And I'm sure someone who's not me might have had experience with that sort of data transformation, but I'm interested in it. It would be fun to have a reason to dig into that with an actual data set. So I'm just going to put that out there.
I've never run on the GPU system, and I want an excuse to do that just for fun. So
If you're doing machine learning stuff on the waveforms and you're actually training something, that's an excuse to run on the GPU stuff. It's going to run faster on there. And so that's a perfectly good case. And I think, even though I don't know what machine learning is, it's a term I wish had sort of like not taken hold, but like using GPUs to analyze waveforms and training a neural net. And it seems like the convolutional neural net you're already using is the correct one to use. But yeah, that'll run faster on a GPU. If that's one of your life goals, do it. And even if it isn't, I should say you should train the neural net on the GPUs anyway, because it'll be more robust and faster.
thank you. Okay. You cool? Thank you.